Welcome to Galaxy Brains.
An infinite amount of cash.
I'm your host, Alex Thorn.
The U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
Bitcoin made a new all-time high.
If you're not long, you're short.
Satoshi's going to come on there, laugh hysterically, go quiet, all Bitcoin's going to be erased.
Bitcoin's the best crypto out there.
Bitcoin is going to zero.
Welcome back to Galaxy Brains. As always, I'm your host, Alex Thorn, head of firm-wide research at Galaxy. Bitcoin not zero. We have a great episode for you today. Zack Shapiro, head of Bitcoin policy at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, will join us to talk about the Samourai Wallet case, where the Department of Justice is arguing that Samourai Wallet, a non-custodial service, was a money services business that didn't register with the U.S. Treasury's FinCEN, despite the fact that FinCEN itself has said that such non-custodial services don't need to register. This goes to the heart of a very existential question for crypto regulatory legal status that I also talked about several weeks ago with Jake Chervinsky. It's a fascinating interview. We'll also check with Natalia Li, Galaxy's U.S. head of policy, about the stablecoin debate and bill in the Senate. Kind of on the rocks at the moment, it looks like. Some negotiations happening. If you're listening to this on Thursday, May 8th, when this pod first drops on audio, the vote could happen that day in the Senate. We'll see. If it doesn't pass, it could portend negative implications for the likelihood of further crypto legislation in Congress. And finally, of course, we will talk with our good friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, as always, about markets, Fed Day, big day today. Well, actually a little bit of a nothing burger at the moment. But before we get to all of that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes. And note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, solicitation by Galaxy or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Let's hop right into it with Beimnet Abebe. Let's go now to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, Beimnet, welcome to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
Fed Day, big day.
Yep, great day.
It seems mostly flat. I mean, tell us what happened. No hike, no cut.
Correct. Basically Powell reiterated his stance that there's too much uncertainty in terms of economic policy, tariff policy, and the path of the overall economy to either hike or cut rates. Or to give meaningful kind of forward guidance about what's likely to happen on a go forward.
Yeah.
Long story short, there's a lot of uncertainty. They're going to be data dependent. That was the message. It was pretty clean, well received by the market. We really didn't move up or down on his Q&A session. I think that's probably the appropriate policy stance at the moment, simply because there's been some constructive developments on the tariff side of things. Yesterday, there was a headline that the UK is really close to signing a deal. Today, we got some AI restrictions lifted for the Middle East so that they can buy some of the higher-end GPUs, from U.S. chip makers. And you had the meeting with Carney yesterday in the White House that seemed productive. And so it does seem like the trade stuff, with the exception of China, is going in a pathway that inspires a little bit more confidence than, kind of where we were at last week or the week prior.
And China, President Trump reiterated today that he wasn't going to lower the, 145% tariff?
Correct. And he also stated that they reached out to him, not the other way around. And so, there's a little bit of
brinksmanship.
Correct.
Yeah. So, as to be expected,
yeah,
I'd say still, I wouldn't say positive. That's the big one to watch, right? U.S. and China, number one and number two economy.
Yep.
Some talk about talks, not talks being held yet, but feels like we're in a slightly more productive space than we were like 2 weeks ago on U.S.-China.
Yeah.
Ish?
Ish.
Yeah, ish.
Ish.
Did they say something? Didn't they say something like they would
They said
meet?
they were considering meeting, and then now meetings have been scheduled for Saturday.
All right, that's something.
Yeah, but they're very far apart.
Yeah.
It's like, Besson said that it could take 2 to 3 years to get a trade deal done with China.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, how long does it take for us to de-escalate, right? And, that might be shorter. And how long till Trump just throws in the towel and just kind of sets rates? And, I think that's kind of going to be a function of how much pain he's willing to withstand if the real kind of trade slowdown starts to affect people and prices in particular. And so, the U.S. has pretty strong tolerance for pain, and so does Trump. So it might be a really long time before he kind of just throws in the towel on negotiating. So we'll see. It's an interesting setup. Right now, it seems like animal spirits are a little bit back in the markets. We've seen a lot of equity tech names, really do well, except today you had a pretty big fall in one of the Mag 7 names due to a slowdown in kind of traditional search. And given the move that's going to happen over time to
AI-driven, rather than searching the internet for a web page that has the answer, people are just asking AI now for the answer.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the AI, while it may use a search engine, it doesn't show the ads from the search engine to the end user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big deal for folks that are in the search engine business, mainly Google, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they were down like 8% plus.
It's interesting. I mean, I think,
it's not a shocker.
I have started asking ChatGPT rather than just Googling stuff.
I'm on Perplexity all day.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, what is this? What is that?
Yeah.
You
I was actually asking it to make some ASCII text art, like where it's just using the characters. It's not there yet, by the way. But again, like just random questions, thoughts, asked it for a synonym or to a word earlier today, rather than going to thesaurus.com, or whatever. So there is a clear...
And it's got humor, too. I ask it,
Yeah.
write me a witty, funny line about this.
Yeah.
So,
Full disclosure, we are not AI writing any scripts for this show. You're getting the raw, unscripted Beimnet and Alex discussion. What about, just equities in general? I mean, we've been having a great week. Obviously, we talked about this last week, a great few weeks, I should say. We talked about this last week that, U.S. equities went on this great a tear of, some with the most consecutive green days and
9 sessions in a row.
in 50 years or something like that. And obviously Bitcoin, you were bearish on Bitcoin, a month ago, and it was bearish. It kind of really rocketed higher earlier in April. Now sitting here in the 96K area feels pretty comfy at this moment.
No, absolutely. I think as long as equities continue to hold up, I think Bitcoin will continue
Why
to trade
are
well.
equities holding up in general? People because the Liberation Day shock is worn off, and
I would largely say that's kind of the reasoning. I would tell you that the retail community has been incredibly active in the entire dip. Basically, net buyers on most days.
Yeah.
So retail has certainly bought the dip, and then you had a large portion of S&P companies as a portion of earnings report last week. Microsoft crushed it, right? That's a huge index weighting. Bit more mixed results here and there. But yeah, it's retail, driving stuff up. And it's also like earnings haven't really been hit by tariffs yet. Mm-hmm. In fact, they've probably been helped because of how much front loading of activity has happened so
People
far.
are going and buying stuff on the idea that it may be more expensive later.
Correct.
Yeah.
But high level, I mean, this market exists in still in some form of like irrational exuberance, right? It doesn't trade on like valuations and fundamentals. You have a lot of high-flying tech names that are very detached from like where a model might tell you
like
that
PE ratio is still very high across the board.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe they're warranted because we're going to just remain in this irrational, exuberant market because the Fed's going to keep policy pretty loose and the government's going to continue spending money, and people are going to still have their jobs, and so there's an argument that this exuberance in markets persists, right? But on the off chance it doesn't, like there's a lot of air for some of these companies, right? Like, you take a look at a stock like Palantir, right? That trades at a 400 plus PE, and on a forward PE, it's like 180, which puts it at one of the most insane companies in the world. Maybe that's justified. Who knows? But I do know that a PE of that magnitude,
It's an outlier.
it's an outlier.
And historically across the indexes, P ratios are historically elevated. They have been
They've
for a
come
while.
off. They come off a lot, and you
Yeah.
know they've rebounded since. But yeah, there's a lot of froth there. And then the other thing is like there's a tremendous amount of buyback activity in the equity market, right? You know, all the big Mag 7 names essentially buy their stock back.
Right. Creates a
And
constant bid.
Constant bid. And here's the thing, the supply of the stock, you're taking float off the market, right? And so if there's buy pressure with less float, that's going to take prices higher. And you've been doing that for the last 4 years. Like these companies have just been buying a ton of their stocks back. So you've got that dynamic, and retail has been paid to buy the dip since the financial crisis.
Yeah.
Every single dip.
And trained and paid. It's worked out. Yeah.
And so until something changes with retail, I struggle to see, stocks cracking in a meaningful way. But ultimately, like, we don't know what the tariff impact is going to be. And there are plenty of signs of stress.
And that
in the economy.
Goods becoming more expensive reduces the purchasing power that retail has, right? I mean,
absolutely.
So once they actually sort of hit and product prices increase, we'll have to wait and see. I mean,
absolutely. Savings rates are really low. You've got 11 million student loan borrowers that are now getting collected on. Right, like there are pockets of stress in the economy. I mean, all of the corporations in the U.S. that have lowered guidance or pushed it lower and have taken tariff related write-offs. Right, you have commercial backed mortgage default rates ticking higher. You've got like home default rates ticking higher, credit card default rates ticking higher. Right, so there are pockets of the economy where you're like, this is concerning. But again, when you put it in the context of 50% of consumption is really driven by the top 10% of income earners, right? Like those top 10% of income earners aren't really feeling the pinch yet.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. All right, well, there it is. Big day, Fed Day, Super Bowl, kind of a non-event at the moment, at least.
A low-rating Super Bowl.
Low rating,
like a Rams one where they score like 3 points.
Yeah, it's a defense-driven game.
Defense,
yes. Yeah, big defensive game. All right, my friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Let's go now to our guest, Zack Shapiro, managing partner at Rains Law and head of policy at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Zack, thank you and welcome to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
I've always wanted to have you on. We've been friends for a while now. And by the way, we had a great time in Bedford a couple weeks ago. Shout out Real Bedford Pirates. What a crazy win that was.
Yeah, what a great conference.
I know. And I just, what a shocking thing that Pete and Emma and the team there have pulled off. Like, I thought he was literally crazy to do this, but it's working.
Yeah, and it looks like it's actually having a meaningful physical impact on that town in a way that's just incredible to see.
Yeah, it's Bitcoin being positive for the world. Let's get right into the main topic we want to talk about, which is the Samourai Wallet case. The DOJ charging the developers of Samourai Wallet with what exactly? And this is not recent, but it's been ongoing. But give us the high-level overview first, Zack.
Absolutely. So let me back up a little bit and explain that I think this is arguably the most important legal and regulatory question in all of crypto. I know that's a bold claim, and I know that the question as to whether the sales of tokens on the secondary market constitute securities offerings gets more attention. But the most important legal question that will decide, I think, whether Bitcoin and crypto reach their full potential is separate from that. It is the question as to where the line is, specifically under Treasury laws and the Bank Secrecy Act, between a regulated financial institution like a bank, and the legal term of art here is an MSB or money service business, and then a piece of software that people can use peer-to-peer to transact with each other. At the outset of Bitcoin, what Satoshi invented in the form of the blockchain is really sort of a step function in the way we can do finance. It, for the first time ever, allowed people to interact with each other directly, peer-to-peer, like they're handing a piece of cash from one to another without a trusted intermediary, which is not something that was available over the internet before. That was the real innovation of Bitcoin. That was the real innovation of blockchain. And frankly, our laws weren't set up for that yet. And so we're going through this period right now where all three branches of government are having to grapple with how do we deal with the current set of laws we have, which are premised on the fact that if you're having an electronic transfer, you're doing it through an intermediary in this era where just technologically that's no longer the case. And, this first came up in the very early days of Bitcoin. People did not understand what, if anything, in the Bitcoin system implicated the Bank Secrecy Act that would require people to KYC their users and have all sorts of requirements. And the part of the government that sort of looks at this question and puts out guidance is called FinCEN. It's part of Treasury and it deals with illicit finance. And so they first put out guidance in 2013 saying essentially exchanges were covered by this Bank Secrecy Act. They had to KYC, but the Bitcoin network itself was not somehow a money service business. And so, Satoshi didn't have to come back and KYC users. Then there was updated guidance, and this is the last guidance we got from FinCEN in 2019 that looked at a bunch of different business models in crypto, people who created wallets, exchanges, ICO issuers, which were in vogue at the time. And it looked at each of these business models and it said, we do or do not think that these business models constitute money transmission and are therefore money service businesses. And the main line here was for custodial business models. So, for example, exchanges and custodial wallets where someone is holding Bitcoin or crypto on your behalf and you're interacting with an account you have with them rather than the blockchain directly. Those are money service businesses. They have to KYC you. And then non-custodial business models, for example, self-custodial wallets, which are just software that help you generate private keys so you can hold your crypto and use the blockchain directly yourself. Those are not money transmitters. And the legal justification behind this, the reason why FinCEN seems to have reached this conclusion, is that the Bank Secrecy Act talks about money transmitters as someone who accepts and transmits value on behalf of the public. And just, you don't need to be a lawyer to realize when you accept and then transmit something, in between, you have to have custody or control of that thing, or else just in the English language, that doesn't particularly make sense. And so this was the 2018 guidance. People understood it to draw this custodial, non-custodial distinction. If you're custodial, you're a money transmitter. If you're non-custodial, you're not. There were lots of high-profile enforcement actions and prosecutions involving the Silk Road, involving exchanges, involving so-called mixers and tumblers on the dark web, where FinCEN and the DOJ went after people who had custodial business models and didn't KYC people. Famous instances of this are Charlie Shrem, CZ, Bitslato, which you might remember from 2022. And everyone kind of understood this was the rules. Now, this all changed in 2023 when the Department of Justice, specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, brought a criminal indictment against the developer Roman Storm of Tornado Cash. And then again in 2024, when the Southern District again brought a criminal indictment against the two developers of Samourai Wallet, Tornado Cash being a smart contract on Ethereum that helps you spend Ethereum privately, Samourai Wallet being a CoinJoin protocol on Bitcoin that helps Bitcoin users do collaborative transactions that preserve their privacy. And in each of these cases, the federal prosecutors charged these software developers with two crimes: money laundering, which we can put to the side for a second, but also with unlicensed operation of a money transmission business. And these are both non-custodial tools. So the way a CoinJoin works, in the case of Samourai Wallet, when you make a Bitcoin transaction, famously, the Bitcoin blockchain is pseudonymous, not anonymous. You can see where the coins are going from and going to, right? The UTXO set. And so, if you're buying a proverbial cup of coffee with your Bitcoin, people can see every other transaction you've made and your net worth, and that's suboptimal. Especially suboptimal if you're like a human rights advocate in an authoritarian country. And so what a CoinJoin is a bunch of Bitcoin users with their own Bitcoin in their own wallet and their own addresses are come together. They spend the same amount of Bitcoin at the same time. And that makes it harder to trace which Bitcoin input matches with which Bitcoin output. And the service that Samourai Wallet, this piece of software, provided is called a CoinJoin coordinator, right? Theirs was called Whirlpool, but it helped people who wanted to spend 5% of a Bitcoin or 5 million Satoshis find each other so they could all collaboratively do that transaction at the same time. Importantly, the users always maintain their keys. In almost all cases, they were sending Bitcoin from one wallet they own to another wallet they own. They weren't sending it to someone else. And the Samourai Wallet software and the Samourai Wallet developers never had custody of user funds, never had access to private keys, never had control. This is just basically a digital bulletin board that helped the CoinJoin users find each other. Nevertheless, the DOJ here took the position that this amounted to money transmission. This amounted to accepting and transmitting funds on behalf of the public. And they're trying to put these software developers in jail for the crime of failing to register with FinCEN for having the software and failing to KYC their users, which, by the way, not only do they not know who their users are, they actually can't, because it's a piece of software.
So they are making this argument, the DOJ, in this criminal case at SDNY, despite the very agency at Treasury that regulates money service businesses having very clearly said this type of business does not need to register.
So what they would say, and what the prosecutors in the Tornado Cash case, which is further along, explicitly did say, is actually all of us lawyers who are looking at this understood the guidance wrong, and this is accepting and transmitting funds. And they use these, what I think are patently ridiculous analogies to a USB cable can transmit data without controlling or custodying that data. A frying pan can transmit heat without controlling or custodying that heat. And therefore, a software tool can transmit crypto without controlling or custodying that. And so they would, up until the revelation we're about to talk about, I think characterize the guidance and what FinCEN said as covering these non-custodial tools, despite the logical issues with that.
But it's like, if a frying pan can transmit heat, what if I put dollar bills in a frying pan and hand them to you? Does that make the frying pan a money transmitter?
Right, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the immediate problem with this argument that the DOJ was making in the Tornado Cash case is that it has no logical limiting principle, right? If any facilitation of a crypto transfer is the same as doing the transfer, then the lumber company that cuts down the tree that makes the envelope that one criminal uses to hand dollar bills to the other should have KYC'd the people who, it gets completely, reductio ad absurdum.
Yes, it does. And it doesn't really make any sense. Also, do we know? So they're saying that's not what FinCEN meant, or are they saying they're saying that's not what FinCEN meant? And by the way, the plain text of this 2019 guidance from FinCEN also doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean it, but also it's not what they meant when they wrote it.
Yes, they were essentially making both of those arguments explicitly in the Tornado Cash case, and it looks like setting up to make those arguments in Samourai Wallet. Now,
but is that what FinCEN meant or not? Do we know?
Right. So there had been a lot of argument back and forth about this, and as of this week, as of May 5th, we actually now do know. There is a old Supreme Court case in the United States called Brady. Brady says that if the government is prosecuting someone and they are in possession of exculpatory evidence, which means evidence that makes it look more likely that the person that they are prosecuting is innocent as opposed to guilty, they have a constitutional duty to turn over that evidence at least before trial. Now, under a federal statute called the Due Process Act, federal courts can create stronger versions of that rule that put a clock on how long you have to turn over that information. And in fact, the judge in the Samourai Wallet case had a rule that within, I believe it was 2 weeks of the indictment or the government becoming in possession of Brady evidence, they are required legally to turn it over to the defense. Now, notwithstanding that rule, we learned on Monday, due to a legal compulsion from the defense here, they requested of the government, which they have a right to do, for specific Brady information. So please tell me XYZ thing that we think might exist and might be exculpatory. Did you have a conversation with FinCEN about how FinCEN sees non-custodial tools and
did you ask
the Samourai Wallet software?
Yeah, did you ask him?
And turns out the answer is yes. In August of 2023, 6 months before the prosecutors brought the prosecution against Samourai Wallet, and around the same time that they arrested Roman Storm in the Tornado Cash case, prosecutors spoke with FinCEN. They explained how Samourai Wallet worked. They said, is this money transmission under the 2019 guidance? FinCEN said, in no uncertain terms, no, it is not money transmission, because we understand money transmission to require control, right? That is the sine qua non of money transmission under the 2019 guidance. And so we do not think you could make out a charge for unlicensed money transmission. Prosecutors apparently said, thank you very much, waited 6 months, brought the case anyway, and concealed this conversation with FinCEN until 6 months into the case, a year after that conversation was had. Only recently told defense counsel, despite the fact that other prosecutors in that office argued the opposite in the Tornado Cash case while this was going on. And so this is a, pretty shocking revelation, and apparently a breach of the judge's orders around when you turn over Brady material. And, honestly, kind of vindicating for those of us who have been out there arguing what we clearly understood the 2018 guidance to mean, and we're being sort of gaslit by federal prosecutors on this.
Yeah, it seemed like everyone knew that guidance. This was relied upon by businesses, big businesses, startups that make these types of tools, right? Like that if you don't control user funds, you can't be a money transmitter sort of by definition. And it also, that 2019 guidance, which was specific to MSB status in crypto, it also flows from a totally legitimate and thoughtful principle around what being a money transmitter business, money service business is, right? Like if you're, what do you call it? Not Wells Fargo, but Western Union. And these are sort of classic money transmitter businesses. Like in the old, think about like sending business money over wire, like in the 1800s, right? You literally walk into a storefront in Boston and you give them money and they send information across to Wyoming, to the frontier, and your recipient walks into the Western Union there and they give them money. But while I've given them my money and until the recipient has received the money, Western Union could abscond with my money, right? It's fully custodial in that sense. And that's sort of one of the core reasons why these laws exist, is to make it illegal for that money transmitter to abscond. But because non-custodial services can't abscond, they don't control the funds. That's why they can't be money transmitters, or not only can't they be, they don't need to be under the law because they don't have an ability to control and abscond with the user funds, right? I mean, that's the core principle.
And in fact, there's older case law sort of squarely on this. There's this old case called Ba, where there's this guy who was in New York City who like took cash from immigrants. He went across the river to New Jersey and wired that money abroad. He had a money transmitter license in New Jersey. He didn't in New York. The feds tried to charge him with money transmission. And despite the fact that he actually had custody of the dollars here, they said, no, you're not a money transmitter, because under the law, to be illegally money transmitting, you need to accept and then transmit those funds. And so, like, I think there are all sorts of reasons why this prosecution was wrong. But what I really want to focus your listeners on here is, what are the stakes of getting bad case law here? So, some might recall the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act, which is basically a covert backdoor ban on the use of cryptocurrency from Elizabeth Warren, who figured out the way to ban crypto legislatively without saying you're banning crypto is to label everyone in crypto, whether you're a Bitcoin miner, whether you're a node runner, whether you're a DeFi front end, et cetera, call you a money transmitter, create obligations to KYC that you're actually not able to comply with, and then say, actually, we're doing this in the name of stopping terrorists and child pornographers and all these terrible people, and sort of hiding behind that. And rightfully, the industry and then policymakers on Capitol Hill realized what this was, and that seems to thankfully not be going anywhere. However, we could accidentally get to that same result, effectively a ban on self-custody, if federal judges come out the wrong way on this issue. And so far, we've had one ruling from a federal judge in the Tornado Cash case, which did come out the wrong way. Judge Fela ruled in her denial of the defendant's motion to dismiss in that case that the Bank Secrecy Act doesn't require custody and control, after federal prosecutors wrongfully argued that's what FinCEN meant. And so if we get bad precedent where federal judges, who are a higher authority actually than FinCEN on what the Bank Secrecy Act means because of the way our separation of powers works, then, okay, if just, back to our analogy about the paper envelope, node runners are at risk, roll-ups are at risk, lightning nodes are at risk, right? Certainly eCash mints, all sorts of, tools in the crypto ecosystem could be labeled as money transmitters and forced to KYC when they are not technically able, at the pain of criminal prosecution.
Yeah, even like an open source software developer who makes a free Bitcoin wallet could theoretically be tagged under that regime as being a money services business.
Absolutely. In fact, the only thing protecting software developers now who create non-custodial wallets is the 2019 guidance, which very explicitly says if you create what they call an unhosted wallet, what we would call a non-custodial wallet, you're not a money transmitter. But if we're not able to rely on the FinCEN guidance anymore, and the DOJ is able to say, screw FinCEN and just try and put people in prison based on their own interpretation of the Bank Secrecy Act, yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't be thrown in jail for creating, the equivalent of Blue Wallet.
Yeah, I had Jake Chervinsky on this podcast a couple months ago, and he talking about this same issue, called it the existential threat to crypto, basically, that this is, and I agree with your preamble at the top, that this really is, yeah, like who can buy and sell tokens, or what is a security or a commodity. These are important issues, but this strikes at the core of what this technology enables. Like this, to your point, this is right. Peer-to-peer electronic cash is what is at stake here. Right?
There were attempts at crypto before Bitcoin, right? DigiCash, eGold, et cetera, and they didn't work because there was a trusted third party, right? There was a so-called, throat to choke, and it was choked. And the reason why Bitcoin did not suffer that fate, and the reason why Bitcoin birthed all of these ideas of decentralized finance and DAOs and all of these sort of lofty cypherpunk goals that we have now, is because it was truly peer-to-peer, right? There isn't a company to regulate. And if the government is going to respond to that fact by putting software developers in place of a regulated financial institution, treating them as if they were the bank that doesn't exist here, this project, we are not going to reach what President Trump is talking about, the United States being the Bitcoin superpower of the world, or the crypto capital. Like if we throw our developers in jail, and this is even more galling, by the way, in the aftermath of, on April 7th, the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche released what's now called the Blanche Memo, saying we would not bring these prosecutions anymore. We are not going to do regulation by enforcement, regulation by criminal prosecution. It should be, FinCEN that decides where the reach of the Bank Secrecy Act goes, and not federal prosecutors. I really do think if this case is allowed to proceed, that's essentially just spitting in the face of the Trump administration, of Todd Blanche. And if the Todd Blanche memo wasn't about Tornado Cash and Samurai, I don't know what it was about. And so, unfortunately, where we are now is the prosecutors are deciding whether their case falls under the Blanche memo or not. It's been over a month at this point. Honestly, I'm really not holding my breath for prosecutors to do the right thing. And so I think realistically at this point, we're waiting to see what the judge in Samourai Wallet does with this revelation. And then we're also waiting to see, is Main Justice, is Todd Blanche, is the White House going to step in here and say, listen, we're not going to allow this Biden era hangover that looks much more like Operation Choke Point 2.0, much more like the Gensler SEC, much more like Warren's attempted ban on crypto, to proceed into the Trump 2.0 pivot on crypto.
So in the pyramid of outcomes, and setting aside the personal lives of Roman Storm or the Samourai Wallet devs, which obviously are in jeopardy here, right? But from a sort of a legal precedent standpoint, a new federal law codifying the 2019 FinCEN guidance is the highest, right? Basically, to start
so
with. Specifically,
that would look like the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act from Emmer, and that would be the best case. In the meantime, we also need to, these cases do need to be dismissed, and then Coin Center is supporting this case, Llewellyn versus Garland, which is affirmative litigation against the DOJ to try and undo some of the bad precedent that was set in Tornado Cash.
And then, but so leaving aside for those guys, actually is the best out if DOJ, whether at SDNY level or main DOJ, withdraws the case or removes these arguments or whatever, that doesn't actually create the legal precedent. You've got Judge Fela's precedent in Tornado that would still stand. Theoretically, the best outcome from the case level would be for this argument to go forward and be shot down by the judge in Samurai, right? For the judge in Samurai to come to a different interpretation of the FinCEN guidance and the BSA than Fela did, and then you've got a conflict in the same jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think realistically, we'd want a better set of facts. So the Llewellyn versus Garland case is where I would rather that happen than keep these criminal prosecutions ongoing. I think FinCEN putting up updated guidance would also be helpful here, 2025 guidance. But the permanent fix,
by the way, just to double clarify, we still mean this type of thing, or maybe there are actual little areas that they can expand it if there is new thinking. But in general, just recodifying it.
And the reason why that matters is that's something that a judge is likely to listen to.
Yeah, because
right?
it's similar to if Congress is currently debating it. You're like, dude, you can't be like that was one of the arguments that was made in a lot of the SEC cases that they had brought against exchanges and stuff, was like, dude, this is clearly being deeply thought about at the legislative level. So you can't argue that like there is a unified agreement that like these tokens are securities, because like 25 Democrats joined Republicans or however many it was to pass Fit 21. Like, so obviously there isn't agreement in your argument, right? Like, that's helpful. I just to throw out here, you talked about Coin Center, and I think this is very apropos to what you said at the beginning. I'm just going to continue. This is like touching the sign here. Neeraj Agrawal, the head of comms at Coin Center, has this iconic tweet. You probably know the one I'm about to read, but from January 2021, "I'm sorry that your warrantless surveillance regime was built on the assumption that people would always need intermediaries to transact." And that really is the truth, right? It is built on mailing a subpoena to a bank and then being like, do you have the criminals' funds? And then if they do, please freeze them. If not, tell us where they last went, and just sending letters around rather than actually catching the criminals. In this stage of an investigation, it's like just following the funds through the regulated KYC banking system. And so you can imagine them being upset with the fact that now you don't need a bank. And these issues are core to even this Genius Act that they're voting on with stables, right? And it's not the same, because stablecoins themselves are off-chain liabilities to, on-chain liabilities to an off-chain asset, and they aren't permissionless by definition. But native BTC, native ETH, native whatever decentralized cryptocurrency is, it's a core deal. I mean, where do you have any, if this is a Brady violation and is ruled to be such, like, what does that mean for the case? Would they get this charge knocked out? They still have the other money laundering charge.
Yeah, so it's a very technical matter. It's not yet a Brady violation because it's pre-trial, and a Brady violation would be post-trial. Now, interesting whether there was a Brady violation in Tornado Cash, if that doesn't come out in that case. But it is a violation of this Due Process Act Rule 5F of criminal procedure. And so now it's up to the judge to decide what to do about this. And the judge has broad discretion whether to do nothing, whether to sanction the prosecutors involved, or whether to dismiss charges.
But like you said, the federal court has seniority in interpreting the BSA. So even if they get in trouble in the case for not having shared this potentially exculpatory evidence, that doesn't mean the DOJ can say, like, we didn't, if they want to, they can say we didn't share it, true, but also we still disagree with it. And so we could still keep that charge potentially on the Samourai devs. Yeah. It's a tricky situation, Zach, but I really appreciate you covering it. And it's a big deal. This is the core. Like I said, lawyers across the crypto spectrum have pointed out how serious this issue is, and how it is an existential threat. And we can't let these things stand.
Yeah, it really is. So, I mean, look, call your congressman, call your senator. I think at this point, unfortunately, it's more likely to be a political fix than a legal fix. And so I think we want to get this to the attention of the Trump administration, as best we can. Ultimately, these federal prosecutors answer to the attorney general. Ultimately, they answer to the president. And, it would be good to have some accountability here.
All right. Zack Shapiro, managing partner at Reins and head of policy at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Zach, thank you so much for coming on Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go now to Natalia Li, head of U.S. policy at Galaxy. Natalia, welcome back to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So let's talk about the Senate's stablecoin bill, the Genius Act. There's one in the House too, the Stable Act, and Reps Maxine Waters and Patrick McHenry had also previously in prior Congresses worked on this in the House Financial Services Committee. But this year we've got a Senate version, the Genius Act, introduced by Senator Bill Haggerty with several co-sponsors, both Republicans and Democrats. And it has been barreling towards a vote for several months now, with back and forth. And the committee, Senate Banking Committee, voted it out of committee 18-6 in March. But now it's been reported there's a bit of a snag happening. And before we get to that, maybe you can tell us what the Genius Act is, and maybe why it matters.
That's right. Sure. Happy to. So the Genius Act overall would establish first ever comprehensive federal framework in the US for digital assets, specifically for stablecoin issuers. So it would provide a pathway for them to come and get licensed on a federal level to avoid sort of state by state licensing regimes. And it would also, provide a path for foreign issuers to come on shore and spell out some, specific and certain requirements for them and their reserves, their operations, the audit requirements, etc. So really a landmark legislation for stablecoins overall, I would say. And then maybe to give the listeners some context on it, on the timeline, so as you mentioned, it was introduced in previous, or versions of it have been introduced in previous Congresses as discussion drafts or as actual legislation, both on the House and the Senate side. On the Senate side specifically, what's been happening this particular Congress is things have really started to pick up last February. And sorry to take you down the memory lane, but if you go back to early February, you remember like this is one of the two big priorities for the administration at the time. So passing the stablecoin legislation and then passing the market structure being another one. So at the time, early February, Senator Hagerty from Tennessee, he is the member of the Senate Banking Committee, along with Tim Scott, who's the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Kristen Gillibrand, the Democrat on Senate Banking, and Cynthia Lummis introduced the Genius Act. This is the stablecoin legislation that we're talking about. At the time, this was good news. Again, delivering on president's priorities, has bipartisan support. Generally, everyone feels good about this. Then mid-March, it moves expeditiously. It passes out of the Senate Banking Committee. Again, good news. It passes 18-6 on a bipartisan basis, keeps moving forward. And what's even more notable, the Democratic caucus within the Senate Banking Committee kind of breaks with the ranking member and then supports the bill. Specifically, Senators Olsa Brooks, Mark Warner, Senator Gallego, Andy Kim, and Lisa Blunt Rochester all end up supporting the bill. They go through like a 3-hour markup and then pass a version out of the committee. And then our expectation, and generally like the public expectation at that point, is things are progressing along. This is really good news. And the public understanding of the process is both members and staffers keep talking to each other. The bill keeps getting better. We see some amendments to it. We see some edits here and there. And a deadline is floated of getting it done by Memorial Day. So that's what we're kind of working with. That is, spring, April timeframe. Mm-hmm. And then, to your point, the surprise kind of comes late last week. So what we would learn is Thursday night, a new version of the bill is introduced, and it's updated to move expeditiously using Senate Rule 14 to kind of allow it to proceed to the Senate floor without being first passed in the committee. We also learn that the actual sort of procedural step, the bill is being filed this Thursday, which is tomorrow, for a procedure called closure, which is generally it's basically allowing it to end the debate on the floor and move to the full Senate floor, expediting the process. You need 3/5 of the Senate, 60 votes, for the Senate to actually invoke this procedure. So that's where the developments kind of intensify last week. And on Saturday, if you guys remember, but on Saturday, I think we have 9 Democrats, led by Senator Gallego, issue a statement that they have concerns with this updated version of the bill. So, those include the need for stronger Bank Secrecy Act anti-money laundering provisions. Those include, national security concerns over foreign issuers and how they operate in the U.S., among many others. And so the statement and the public comments surrounding it kind of provide this impression that the Democrats are signaling that they no longer support the bill, and that they would vote against the procedure to move the bill to the full Senate consideration. Again, this is a surprise. This is an unexpected setback after we all thought that things are kind of progressing along in a bipartisan manner. And so adding a little bit into this confusion too is the fact that now there are some Senate Republicans that are casting doubt over their support of the Genius bill. And so that includes, at this point, Josh Hawley from Missouri, Rand Paul, and then Senator John Kennedy, who actually originally voted for the bill on the Senate Banking Committee. So all of them are kind of signaling their concerns over the bill. The good news here is that the conversations are very much continuing. So folks are working with the deadline of tomorrow for this vote. And then we've heard, it's been publicly reported that both, key negotiators on the Senate Banking Committee have met this morning and sort of considering to hash out the issues. So that's
So we're
recording
Yeah, we're recording on Wednesday, May 7th. And so this, if you're listening when we drop on audio Thursday, May 8th, and then that vote will be tonight, probably still, we think, the cloture vote.
Cloture vote,
That's
yes.
the plan.
That's the plan. I think they may have some flexibilities on their timelines. So this could, if it doesn't happen this week, it could happen next week. I think the things to remember is time is of the essence here. Congress has a monumental task of going through the reconciliation process, actually passing the budget, funding the government. So that's taking a lot of time and brain space in DC at the moment. And so, again, Congress sets a patriotic deadline for themselves of July 4th for getting the budget done. That may spill into the fall timeframe, but there aren't that many legislative days left in this session. I know it comes maybe as a shock to the listener, but it's about 100 at this
Yeah,
point,
it's basically,
right?
the year's almost over, it turns out. Yeah.
Yes.
Senate in particular, I mean, the averaged amount of time, I think, it's not set specifically, but once you vote cloture and you enter the formal, final stages of voting on a bill, we're talking about what, like 30 hours of floor time or
About
something?
so. About so.
I mean,
And
so
I also
that's why they call it the world's most deliberative body, right?
it is. It 100% is.
A lot of time talking about anything that they want to get done at all.
Yes, there's a lot of process. There's a lot of decorum still on the Senate side and the House side, I think, on the Hill in general. And then there's, things like recess, like Memorial Day recess is coming up. Monday and Friday are not really working days. Those are kind of, those are off the table. And then August recess, that's the whole month of August, which may get canceled, but, depending on where we stand with the budget. But as of now, I think the goal is for them to actually take that recess. So I think the implications there is, for the stablecoin bill, taking its time is one, there's less time for Congress to pass the legislation in general. And then two, there is more opportunity to lose bipartisan support in that time frame. What do I mean by that, right? Like time is of the essence, they have budget to do, they have a lot of things to accomplish. And then, you got to remember that in the backdrop of this, there's also market structure. So stablecoins were supposed to be the easier of the two.
Yeah, let's talk about the implications. And actually, you know what? Before we do that, Politico did cover the statement that Gallego and those 8 other senators sent on Saturday night with the headline, Democrats reverse course to oppose Senate crypto bill. So that is how, I would say, that was the first sort of mainstream political coverage of that letter. And that was the headline. Senator Gallego basically denied that it was a reversal. And they're saying, actually, the bill that was introduced for floor consideration, which is this new draft from last week, is materially different on some of the items they thought would be in there. So we don't really know. These negotiations are ongoing about where it will land, but it's troubling for the likelihood of the Genius Act passing, because these 9 Democrats, 5 of them voted for it in committee. Senator Gallego is the minority chair of the Digital Asset Subcommittee, or whatever we call ranking member of the subcommittee that Senator Lummis chairs, Inside Banking. Gallego and Andy Kim, I'm not sure about the others who have signed the letter, but they have A ratings from the Stand With Crypto organization. So it's if they aren't going to support it, it makes it very difficult to see how it can pass, I would say. I mean, it may still be able to, right? But that's where the fear is coming from in the crypto industry and the urgency on this bill. But then, to your point, the other reason is that if this one can't get done, which is widely seen as more bipartisan, easier, quote unquote, simpler, less controversial than market structure. Well, if this one can't pass, then what happens to the other crypto legislative priorities, such as market structure? In your mind, I mean, let's say, Genius is not, let's say cloture fails, setting aside whether they go back to the drawing board on Genius, what is that as an indicator for you on market structure?
I think this just indicates, again, less time to get market structure done as they hash out the Genius concerns, right? Like that's just like brain space that's being used for something else that's ultimately, in this scenario failing, but hopefully it will not. But, and then it's bad blood, right? Like it's a demoralizing type effect generally. And then I would say, again, like in the backdrop of the stablecoin conversation on the Senate side, the House Financial Services and House Ag are leading on market structure. And so the market structure discussion bill actually was released on Monday, I believe. Yes, on Monday, earlier this week. And the committees ended up holding not one, but two hearings already. So one was the actual committee hearing, and that one was the walkout that was sort of led by Ranking Member Waters and some other members to hold a so-called shadow hearing on sort of the president's conflicts of interest in the crypto industry. So it's already kind of, keep in mind that, the Senate negotiations that are again supposed to be easier and smoother and just focus on a specific payment instrument are taking place as the market structure debate is kind of getting heated as well. So to me, it's really both. On the House side. Yeah. So it's really both. And hopefully, again, like this morning's news were very encouraging. The folks are meeting, the members and the staffers, the key negotiators are meeting and having these conversations. And I still think that there's a lot of desire to get it done and get it to the president's desk before Memorial Day.
Well, that would be great. I think an interesting thing about this bill is that, crypto is fine right now. We have stables. There's a lot of them, right? To me, this is more about creating the clarity to let traditional capital markets use stable coins and giving crypto the certainty, regulatory certainty that it can grow because it won't be made, these stable coins won't be made illegal in the future. And then there's an entire geopolitical angle here, which is that this is Secretary Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said at the March crypto roundtable at the White House, we are going to maintain the US dollar dominance and we're going to use stable coins to do that. So this is a tool that the executive branch wants to help distribute dollars worldwide. So a lot of factors here. It seems like a pretty good bill to me and pretty good compromise overall. So I hope they can get it done.
I hope so as well. And I think it's also being considered as an overall upgrade to the payment system, both in the wholesale and the retail side. So there's lots of interesting angles out there and sort of vested interests. And I think everyone at this point just wants to get it done and move on to the market structure. So hopefully that's what happens in the next couple of days.
And that's a whole different animal to tackle, the market structure bill. Well, thank you so much, Natalia Li, Galaxy's U.S. head of policy. Thanks for coming back on Galaxy Brains.
Of course, anytime.
That's it for this week's episode of Galaxy Brains. Thank you to our guests, Zack Shapiro, head of policy at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and Natalia Li, head of U.S. policy at Galaxy, and our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. Everyone have a safe and happy weekend, and we will see you next week. Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email, read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXYResearch. See you next week.